Любі друзі, доброго дня! Вітаємо вас на каналі «Фантастичні Токс», на каналі, що говорить про наукову фантастику та фентезі, про авторів, книги, тренди галузі та все найкрутіше, що відбувається у нас в галузі. Я забула набрати собі келих, тому що я просто зроблю так і cheers! Сьогодні у нас інтерв'ю із зоряним гостем. І коли я кажу зоряним, я насправді маю зірковим гостем. Сьогодні із нами Джо Аберкромбі, король грімдарку, автор трилогії «Перший, закон», автор трилогії «Потрощене море» і загалом просто король грімдарку і взагалі крута людина. Ми страшенно довго намагалися запросити до нас сьогодні Джо. Ми страшенно раді, що це нам вдалося. І розпочнемо, мабуть, із привітання. So, hello, Joe. Nice to see you.
Yes, I wish I'd got a drink now. But I've drunk so much over the summer holidays that I'm on a dry couple of weeks recovering, letting my liver recover.
That's okay. We'll still have plenty of chances to come together and drink. Sure. So my name is Daria Piskuzuk. I'm Ukrainian author. Here is my book. And I will be an interviewer / interpreter today. And I have my two beautiful colleagues above me. Мене звати Дар'я Піскузук, я українська письменниця, авторка технофентезі «Машина» сьогодні. І перекладатиму трішки, і трішки задаватиму запитань Джо, і передаю мікрофон своїм прекрасним дамам наді мною.
My name is Svetlana Taratorina, who have another microphone. I am Ukrainian sci-fi and fantasy novel author. And we met with you, Joe, at WorldCon in Helsinki and in Dublin, and I'm your great fan, and I'm very glad to see you again in Ukraine, virtually.
Oh yeah, thank you. Good to see you.
Я Світлана Тараторіна, українська фантастка, яка пише і фентезі, і сайфай. Ми всі сьогодні трошки збуджені, трошки схвильовані, тому, можливо, в ефірі всяке, але ми страшенно раді бачити Джо Аберкромбі у нас ось так віртуально в Україні.
Hi, Joe. My name is Irina Grabowska, and I'm a Ukrainian steampunk and fantasy writer. We never met, but I'm your fan, and I read a lot of your books. Thank you for coming.
It's a pleasure. We're obviously linked by a mutual love of me, which is a very wonderful thing to have, I'm sure. It's good to see you all. Thanks a lot for having me on. Thank you.
Любі друзі, сьогодні ми також збиратимемо кошти для медичного батальйону «Госпітальєри». В коментарях в чаті до прямої трансляції в Ютубі ми вже вклали посилання на карточку, де ми збиратимемо кошти. Під час стріму надсилайте, ми будемо все вказувати. Після того, як закінчиться стрім, ми оголосимо, скільки зібрали. So I've just told that we're gathering money today for the medical supplies for the Hospitaliers organization. They are currently saving lives on the front line, and I think today and yesterday I saw like a couple more appeals together for medical supplies since they're a counter-offensive that are started in the south of Ukraine. So with offensive, there is always a lot of much more lives lost, a lot of injuries. So today we'll be gathering for the medical supplies. Як ми вестимемо нині наш стрім? Для тих, хто ще не знайомий із тим, як ми працюємо, ми працюватимемо двома мовами – українською та англійською. Питання українською з'являтимуться на екрані у формі тексту, самі ж ми озвучуватимемо питання англійською. Джо матиме змогу відповісти англійською, і далі я відтворю все українською з допомогою магічного блокноту і олівця. Ось, також скажу вам наступну річ, що сьогодні ви можете нас дивитися не лише на YouTube-каналі Фантастичних Токс. Ви можете дивитися нас також у нас на Твіттері, можете дивитися також на нашому Фейсбуці та також на Фейсбук-сторінці наших нових партнерів Comic-Con Ukraine. Для всіх цих людей я кажу дякую, що прийшли до нас на ефір. Рекомендую записатися, вподобати це відео, поставити дзвіночок, підписатися на канал, бо знаєте, останній день літа, а у нас на вересень уже 2 автори є на інтерв'ю, тому давайте. So, I think it's high time for us to start. So we will be having some questions both from the first law and from for the writing, for the trafficking as well. We have, I think, only 4 books of yours translated in Ukrainian, but we have a lot of fans who've read some of those even in English. So we will try to balance out the questions, but please, if it's possible, try not to bring too many spoilers, because we will be severely punished by the publishers.
Of course,
and I hope that it will be amazing. So let's start with the first question. So the Blade itself, the first book of the first law trilogy, opens up with a lot of notions that are very common for the classic fantasy. We see wizards, we see knights, we see duels, we see those harsh Northmen, etc. And then you open the book and start reading, and you understand that the book is actually very focused on the characters. It's very much dedicated to opening every single person, not only as a knight or a person who has assassinated a lot of people, but actually as real complicated people. So I wanted to ask you, was your interest in doing so a subversion of typical fantasy genres, or was it your way of introducing us to a very vast new world?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously I wrote that book quite a long time ago now, more than 20 years ago since I started that. I know I don't look old enough, but it's true, 20 years. And I think you hear a lot of people talk about a book over time, and they'll say various things about it, and you'll start to think, oh, maybe that was what I was thinking. Maybe I am that clever, and I had a lot of brilliant ideas when I started out. I mean, I think really what I wanted to do when I started writing was to write the kind of book that I loved. You know, I'd loved Lord of the Rings and Tolkien growing up, and I'd then read A Game of Thrones and been very affected by that, the grittier, darker, more character-focused take that it had on fantasy. And I'd read a lot of kind of revisionist westerns, things like Lonesome Dove, Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove, and others that, you know, take this kind of grittier, more modern angle on a classic genre, if you like. And I'd read all kinds of other books, a whole range. And so I suppose I just set out to write what I liked. And I think what that was really something very character-focused, but still very much within fantasy. You know, I wanted to write something that was recognizably fantasy, the way that Unforgiven, the Clint Eastwood Western, is a very classic Western, but it does something new with the material. It has a kind of more modern, grittier take on the Western form. If you read what the outline of the story is, it seems like a cliche, really. It seems very, very familiar. But it's the attitude that's taken to the story, the dialogue, the tone of voice, the moral framework that makes it something new. And it's more interesting because it's very classic, you know? And so I loved fantasy. I wanted to write something that had all those fantasy things: wizards, magic, a lot of swords, towers, things of that kind, barbarians. But I wanted to do it kind of with my own voice and to stay very close to the characters. And the result is kind of what happened when I sat down and tried to write it. So I don't think there was a grand mission statement at the time, but looking back, I think that's kind of what I had in mind.
Отже, відповідь наступна, що написана ця оповідь, перша книга із трилогії «Перший закон» аж 20 років тому. І так, Джо знає, що він, по правді, не виглядає так, мовляв, це було 20 років тому. І за цей час Джо достатньо разів чув, що ось такий був план в автора, ось це він хотів досягнути. І зрештою, коли ти чуєш це з часом, то ти розумієш, я такий крутий, я справді таке придумав. Але по правді я писав першу книгу просто так, як книгу, яку я хотів почути, прочитати і побачити. Я страшенно любив класичне фентезі, я був фаном «Володаря перснів», а тоді зустрівся із «Грою престолів», такою трохи темнішою версією класичного фентезі, трохи більше фокусованою на персонажах, яка різнилася і тоном, і підходом до людей тощо. І я розумів, що так, я хочу привнести такий модерн у жанр. Певною мірою також на мене в той час вплинули вестерни, які я теж дивився, і тут, скажімо, наведемо приклад із фільмом «Непрощенний» із Клінтом Іствудом, який є класичним вестерном, який, якщо глянути на сюжет, абсолютно банальний, типовий вестерн. Та погляньте тільки, яка тональність цього фільму, які персонажі, які діалоги, і ти розумієш, що цей твір вдихнув нове життя у у жанр вестерну. Так само, в принципі, я хотів зробити і сам. Я знав, що є речі у жанрі, які я страшенно люблю, і це, власне, класика фентезі, це є маги, це є вежі, замки, це є лицарі, маги, але при цьому всьому це були лицарі, маги, замки мого характеру. І насправді, для мене ніби не було такого якогось конкретного плану кинути виклик жанру фентезі, але якщо так обернутися назад і запитати себе, то, мабуть, так і є. We have actually a very specific guest for you for the next question. A top fan. This is a friend of ours. His name is Andrei, and he's Ukrainian author as well. And he was telling me about your books, I think, for as much time as I know him. I know him for a couple of years. So he's here with us today, and he will present the question himself. Give me just a second to add him to the stream.
Hey.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Joe.
Hey.
It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Andrei Novik, and I'm a new Ukrainian fantasy writer. I'm honored to participate in this conversation and ask a question of an author who has had significant influence on my writing. So thanks, Фантастичні Talks, for this opportunity. And my question is, Sandan Glokta is a well-known fan favorite in the first law. Not only because of his difficult life path, but because of his sharp mind too. But yet, in the next books, we see new characters rise up, just as intelligent and cunning as he is. So, do you think there will be a character who outshines him after reaching his age? So, as for me, I would vote for Savin, I think.
Yeah. Oh, look, first of all, thanks so much for that. It's I remember meeting George R.R. Martin for the first time, who'd been a big influence on me, and that's always a big it's always a big thing to meet people who've had a kind of influence on me. So it's great to hear that I might have had an influence on somebody else. It's lovely. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the first characters you come up with always have a kind of intensity and a quality that is often hard to recapture. So I like to go to new characters and not get dragged into the same old ground and end up, you know, it's easy to end up plowing the same furrow as a writer and write 15 Logan Ninefingers books or whatever it might be. I think it's important to keep trying to work with new characters, new types of people, stretch yourself as a writer and try new things, but you're always in a way trying to recapture the sort of immediacy and the exuberance that you have when you first put pen to paper. And so, you know, I think Glokta and Logan and some of those characters from the first law had this really powerful voice. You know, I've got better as a writer in many ways, but I'm still always trying, in a sense, to sort of recapture the intensity of the voices those characters had, and it's sort of an endless quest to be as good as you were the first time in some ways. In terms of clever characters, I mean, I suppose everyone has their moment in the sun. Everyone has their moment of victory, but no victory lasts forever. You know, they say all political careers end in failure. So I'm sure that eventually, you know, as Glokta rises, eventually he too must fall. Even the powerful wizards in the background, mentioning no names, you know, have their ups and downs. So certainly the little people will have their ups and downs too.
Перш за все, дякую за питання. Пригадую, коли я вперше зустрівся із Джорджем Мартіном, це було неймовірно, це було дуже мило і круто, бо, власне, так само, як я вплинув на тебе, Андрію Новік, так само Джордж Мартін вплинув на мене. Тому дякую, я розумію, що це дуже класно, і це насправді може вплинути на людину. Що стосується запитання, то перші персонажі авторів або циклів завжди дуже насичені, їх не так легко повторити. Це впливає на те, що, зрештою, коли мені доводиться створювати нових персонажів, я розумію, що у мене два шляхи. Або йти уже тими зрощеними стежками, або йти незвіданими полями. І я розумію, що повинен йти по нових шляхах, бо інакше це ж буде просто безліч книг про одного і того самого ж Логана Дев'ятипалого. Натомість кожен персонаж має починатися заново, стартувати в різних точках, і я намагаюся пропрацьовувати кожного новим шляхом. Глокта, Логан, вони так, дуже круті персонажі, одні з них перших, і я далі намагаюся зробити наступних ще крутіших, ще насиченіших. А що стосується розумних персонажів, то, по правді, кожен герой розумака в моєму романі має певний момент переможності, момент під сонцем. Але, зрештою, кожен із них буде затьмарений. Чи то Глокта, чи то величний маг, який керує подіями за куліс, чи то, зрештою, якийсь дрібний, неважливий персонажик на задньому фоні, який мав свою мить і зникнув. Це абсолютно природно, і з кожним персонажем так трапиться.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your answer.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much.
I hope we will meet again.
Yeah, one of these days. Sooner the better, for sure.
Yeah. And I have another question of your big fan, Ukrainian book blogger Грампі Рідерка. So she said, I'm fascinated how the number of female characters rises in your books, as well as how much deeper the characters become. How do you work on creating them, and who in the world of First Law character?
Ooh, yeah. I suppose, you know, I'd read a lot of fantasy as a kid. Tolkien being the kind of granddaddy, if you will. And then, you know, things like Dragonlance and David Eddings and a lot of the classic fantasy of the 80s and 90s. And, you know, Tolkien is wonderful in many ways, but he wasn't brilliant on the female representation, I think it's fair to say. And, you know, a lot of traditional fantasy hasn't always been either. So I think when I set out to write the classic fantasy in the way, you know, that Unforgiven is a classic Western, I was very much, without really thinking about it, writing quite a male book with some very male characters, you know, a barbarian, a kind of sneering nobleman, a wizard, that kind of thing. They're very male tropes. And so also being a man, I think when you first start writing, you tend to reach for what is familiar and obvious. And I'd spent a lot of time in groups of men, you know, but by definition, not a huge amount of time among groups of women, you know, without any men there. So I think you naturally do what you know and what you've read. Fantasy was a very male genre, and I wrote a set of very male characters. And I thought I was being incredibly clever by having, you know, some offbeat female characters. And I'm very pleased with the female characters in the First Law, both of them, because there are basically only two. And in some of the reaction to the first law, you know, this was really coming out before the time that there was a lot of feminist critique widely available on the internet. I mean, it's kind of routine now that books are subjected to that. Back in those days, 2006, I guess, it's kind of before Twitter, if you can imagine such a thing, and before, you know, the internet. And so I started to dimly perceive as I was 2 books in, I could have done better with some of the female characters, and there could be more of them. Just simply incidentally in the background, you know, there's this instinct where I need an innkeeper. Well, an innkeeper's a man. I need a smith, and a smith, that's a man. And, you know, a merchant, well, a merchant's a guy, you know. So every character suddenly, it's just full of men. Everyone's men, you know, and women are incredibly exceptions to be there. And so when I wrote my next book, which was SFF World, I was kind of very conscious of this, and I thought I need to do a female central character. And so I worked with a female central character in SFF World, although most of the cast was still male. Then The Heroes was my 5th book, and that was kind of very male, I think for a reasonable reason, because it's a book about war and a kind of macho concepts of heroism, and so it sort of made sense it was a male cast. Poor excuse, but there we go. And then with Red Country, as a kind of Western take, it naturally allowed for more women, and there was a female central character there too. But when I came to do Half a King and the Shattered Sea series after that, I thought, right, now I've got to do a bit better from this point of view. And so I kind of consciously designed a world that was much less patriarchal, and, you know, where there's a very important female sphere of power, which is almost coming to eclipse the male sphere, because money and finance and trade and knowledge are all considered kind of female in the way that war is considered the male sphere in those books. And so naturally you get a lot of very powerful and varied and various women in those books, which I was very kind of pleased with. And then the more recent books that I wrote, The Age of Madness, takes the First Law world into a kind of more industrial era. And so it felt like a time of social upheaval and social change, and that naturally there would be all kinds of new people, you know, lower class people, women, diverse people of all kinds, sort of finding ways to influence society in a way they hadn't before. And so in that book, you know, one of the characters is this female investor and a kind of networker, a socialite, you know, who's exerting a new kind of power in a new sort of society. And then there's another who's kind of, you know, has a sort of magical influence within this very male northern society. And so it was an opportunity to kind of have a much more evenly split cast. And I think there's just no downside to that, you know, because amazing thing I was told, a fact I learned after writing the First Law, 50% of people are female. Incredible. Yeah. Who knew? And so if you reflect that in your book, it's only natural that there be various people, and it creates a whole range of different kind of dynamics and relationships. You know, there's just so much more variety to the nature of things. And so it can be a bit more of a stretch writing female characters. And I think if you're a man, you may be second guessing yourself a bit more sometimes. It may be that I'll always be a little more comfortable and natural writing men, but that shouldn't mean you don't make the effort. And I think your books are probably better for it.
Thank you for your women.
No, thank you. Thanks for appreciating them.
Отже, Джо читав насправді дуже багато фантастики. Точніше скажемо, що фентезі. Толкін, для нього дідусь фентезі, були також інші класики фентезі 80-х. І якщо, скажімо, звернутися до Толкіна, то він був дуже крутим автором і фундатором у дуже багатьох аспектах фентезі, але, по правді, він не дуже добре вмів писати жінок, вони не дуже присутні у «Володарі перснів». Коли я починав писати перший закон, знову ж таки, за аналогією із фільмом «Непрощене» з Клінтом Іствудом, я розумів, що є певні маркери, певні посади, які ми звикли вважати, що вони є чоловічі. Це, зрештою, похмурий північанин з великою кількістю вбивств за спиною, це є маг, тощо. Я сам чоловік, тому для мене чоловічий досвід був простішим, зрозумілішим. Я набагато більше проводив часу із чоловіками, тож із жінками проводив трошки менше. І в один момент я зрозумів, що фентезі насправді як жанр дуже чоловічий. Тож, чи не буду я хитрун, якщо я зміню це і почну вписувати жіночих персонажів. Це було насправді давно, рік 2006. Це, якщо ви собі можете уявити, ще до Твіттера. Не було ніякої феміністичної критики, не було соціальних вимог, аби ми бачили багато жіночих персонажів, однак я намагався вписувати персонажок. Зрештою, друга книга циклу «Перший, закон», я зрозумів, а я міг би тут вкрутити жіночку тут чи там. Ось, скажімо, з'являється персонаж Коваль, або з'являється персонаж, який працює у таверні, чи є персонаж, який є найманцем. Усі вони, перш за все, в моїй голові з'являлися по дефолту чоловічими. Але я думав, а чому? А чому вони не могли б, в принципі, бути і жінками? Яка різниця? Коли я писав вже книгу «Best Serve Call», тут я вперше спробував помістити жінку у центр сюжету. П'ята книга циклу, вона про війну і такі маскулінно-мачості концепції, тож там теж чоловіків більше. Коли писав «Red Country», там теж набагато більше є жінок. І вже до моменту, коли я написав «Півкороля», я свідомо робив світ менш патріархальним, бо я розумів, що це світ, у якому я можу зробити цікаву динаміку розподілу поміж статями. Якщо чоловікам належить війна, то жінкам шлюб, дім тощо. І з цього насправді можна зробити прикольний дріж. Коли я писав Age of Madness, зрозумів, що почалась у моєму світі індустріалізація. І завдяки цьому на передній план виступають нові соціальні прошарки. Це є і нижчий клас, і жінки. І якщо раніше вони у цьому світі не мали нагоди на те, щоб виразити свій голос, тепер у них на це є шанс. Скажімо, у цьому світі є як мінімум дві нові круті персонажки. Серед них одна є магічка. Коли я дійшов до зрозуміння того, що так, я міг вписати достатню кількість жіночих персонажів, я зрозумів, що цілий новий пласт проблематик з'являється, ціла нова сфера динаміки поміж персонажами, бо знаєте що, чорт забирай, 50% населення таки жінки. Зрештою, також існує трудність та, що коли ти чоловік, ти зобов'язаний трішечки задумуватися, запитати себе, чи справді жінка би так зробила, чи реалістичне твоє відображення, однак результат точно того вартий.
Are you a professional translator out of interest?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No. I'm a writer and I'm a project manager in a software company. So I was never a translator before this, but now I am just like a YouTube streamer.
That's amazing. I work with a guy in a Spanish festival that I go to quite a lot, and he's like a full-on pro. He does work for the EU, doing simultaneous translation for diplomats and so on, like high level. And he's the only guy I've seen before who can really take a answer of that length and just do it. But he performs it, right? He does you can tell the timing. He's doing the timing of the jokes and things, which you've also kind of got. So,
and she translates, really good.
That's nice to hear. I've actually had longer answers from Peter Watts.
Right.
And he was also doing the sounds, like the sounds of trying to drown or a sound of drinking beer. So that was like a much more artistic interpretation.
And he's pretty technical in his language, I'm guessing, as well, isn't he? He's very kind of labyrinthine and sophisticated. Which must be tough.
Like there is this part of the brain that is behind this and that, and I would not be able to read that thing, not only as translate, but those things are cool to witness and experience, I think.
Yeah.
And we have next question from our colleague. She's a young adult author, Natalie Matalinets. Hello, Natalie. And she asked about Half a King. Half a King is an example of a very dynamic young adult fantasy. Did you feel the change when working with adult books and young adult? Were there any new challenges?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I guess there's some dispute over how much of a young adult book it is. You know, I intended it really as young adult, I guess, but by that I meant the kind of book that I read and liked when I was 14, 15, 16, which was pretty adult, really. I mean, I was reading a lot of adult fiction at that time, so, and I wanted it still to work for, you know, adult readers that I already had. I wanted to gain readers, not lose them, generally, with each book that I write, if possible. So I don't think it's massively different from my adult stuff. I mean, the main thing really was it was kind of simplifying, reducing the scale of it. So they were shorter. I wanted to write much shorter. I wanted to see if I could do epic fantasy at a not epic length, if you know what I mean. I guess I sometimes get a bit frustrated by the hugeness of some fantasy. You know, when I was a kid, Lord of the Rings was just the biggest thing you could read. That and War and Peace, maybe. You know, if you'd read those, they were the biggest books out there. Whereas now, you know, most series are War and Peace length every installment, and there's 13 of them or something. You know, they're huge series of huge books, which is great for some purposes, but I like things to be a bit tighter. So I wanted to see if I could write, you know, short epic fantasy and get the same feel to it. And I wanted to write some younger characters because I'd written generally these older, more used up, cynical, world-weary characters who'd kind of got their adventures behind them, were quite set in their ways. And seeing my kids grow up and seeing how they reacted to stories and, you know, thinking about how those books you read when you're 13, 14 affect you in a way the ones you read as an adult never quite do. You know, I wanted to read something that might make a mark on someone. And so for a whole set of reasons, I thought I'd try something YA, right, shorter length, younger characters, and also less points of view, if you like, because I tended to do these big mosaic books with 6 or 7 points of view all interleaved. And in a way, this pulls one of those out and just does one story and follows one point of view. And so trying to boil down and simplify and take a slightly different, more epic tone, like a kind of more mythic tone, I suppose, a bit less modern, a bit less earthy. So it was a way to try some new stuff and do different things altogether. And hopefully also get paid, which is always nice.
Так, певною мірою була різниця у написанні книг для дорослих та для дітей. Є насправді певні суперечки щодо того, чи ця книга «Клуб короля» є справжнім як адалтом, і я це зробив цілком і повністю свідомо. Я писав так, якби писав я для себе 15-річного, 16-річного, 17-річного, але я ж в той час читав дорослі книги. І я не хотів втрачати свою дорослу аудиторію, але хотів також і задати їм нову загадку, новий челендж. Ось у мене нова книга, вона і для підлітків теж, але і ви можете зрештою її читати. Основна різниця у написанні Young Adult для мене полягала у тому, що потрібно було зменшити масштаб. Я хотів створити епічне фентезі та не обсягу епічного фентезі. Зрештою, якщо пригадати давніші часи, то, скажімо, «Володар перснів» або «Війна і мир» – це були найтовстіші книги з усіх можливих. Ти розумів, що ти прочитав ці книги, нічого грубшого більше не буде. А тепер книги з'являються набагато більші, грубші, з'являються оповіді там на 14 томів на більше, де кожна настільки велика, як «Володар перснів». По-друге, я також хотів створити щось із молодшими персонажами, адже мої усі такі вже були доволі бувалі, доволі цинічні, а я хотів свіжіших, молодших персонажів таких, які зможуть бути корисно навіть, скажімо, для моїх дітей. Зрештою, хотів би написати щось таке, що, можливо, вплинуло би для інших. У моїх дорослих книгах дуже багато нараторів, від 5 до 6. У цій книзі лише 1, і це теж цікава переміна. Також, зрештою, додам, що хотів я дати не таке епічне відчуття цій серії, а щось таке більше легендарне, щось таке не з цієї землі. Ну і в кінці кінців непогано було би написати щось, за що тобі дадуть гроші. So we have a lot of comments here in the chat section, a lot of praise, a lot of questions. So we'll try to go through a couple of them. Let's see. I see a lot of those. Let me just scroll through them. God, there is a lot, and there's in different languages. So that's super cool. So I see one. How was your experience with Ukrainian publishing houses?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You know, I'm published in, I don't know, I suppose 20 or 30 languages now, which is something you never think about when you're first writing in the middle of the night for your own amusement. You know, you have two halves to your brain. On the one hand, you think, I'm amazing and everyone is going to love this. And on the other hand, you think, who would ever be interested in this rubbish I dreamed up in the middle of the night for my own amusement? And so the idea of anyone reading it, let alone people, you know, translating it and reading it in other languages, is always amazing. I mean, most of the time you're at quite arm's length from your publishers, your foreign publishers. You kind of, I sell rights to my UK publisher, and then they tend to manage most of the relationships, or my UK agent manages the relationships, depending. So sometimes you'll get some contact from a translator. Sometimes you'll get an invite to attend, you know, an event for one reason or another. But actually I had a particular, you know, different relationship with the publisher of the latest book, Nebo Book Lab, I think they are, who did Half a King, because they just did such an amazing edition. I thought it was one of the best editions I'd ever seen of a book of mine. And, you know, there've been some really high-end, expensive limited editions of my stuff at times. So the artwork was just beautiful, and not only was the artwork great, but it was really integrated into the book in a really clever and thoughtful way, you know, and it was not just good illustrations. It had really been thought about. And the kind of world had seeped into all kinds of aspects of the way the characters were portrayed. And it also reminded me a lot of some of the kids' books that I'd read when I was a kid. There's a writer called Rosemary Sutcliffe, you might probably won't have heard of, but wrote kind of historical novels for kids, which were very influential on me growing up. And they were one of the things that kind of I was thinking of when I wrote Half a King. And the illustrations for the Ukrainian edition reminded me a lot of, you know, some of the illustrations in UK kids' books at that time. And I just thought it was a brilliant edition. So I got in touch to say, you know, how much I appreciated it. And they sent me a big video back, you know, showing the office and all the people in the office and the office dog and everyone talking about how excited they were to work on it, which was lovely. And then the invasion happened like 2 days afterwards. So it was bizarre that I just had this very, you know, very personal kind of contact with people out there the moment that it happened. And, you know, very sadly, they've not been able to do a kind of print edition of the second book. But I think they're going to be doing ebooks at least until printing starts up again, whenever that is. I very much hope that, you know, there'll be a second and third book, because they did such a great job with the first one.
So actually, before I translate, there is something I wanted to add to you. Is Andre, who was there as your biggest fan, etc., etc. He actually now is the author in the same publishing house. So you're sharing the publisher. That's the first thing. And the second thing, I'm not sure if you know, but the center for printing and publishing in Ukraine is Kharkiv. It's the second biggest city. And it's the one in the northeast, and it's being bombarded like all the time. But the interesting thing is that they keep printing no matter what. And very recently there was some book that people were asking, like, where is it? It's been announced, like, give us the book. And the printing house answered that I'm sorry, but because we're heavily shelled, we can print only during the day now. And people were like, wait, so like for the first couple of months of the war, you still kept on printing the books during the day and during the night? And people were mind blown that it's such a big and important and daunting task from both sides, and the cultural and the physical. Отже, на цей момент Джо перекладений уже 20-30 мовами. І по правді, коли ти сидиш вночі, пишеш один єдиний, ти не думаєш про те, що хтось тебе перекладе. Твої думки варіюються від «я ж геніальний, весь світ мене прочитає» до «та хто ж я такий, кому я потрібен?». Модель, за якою я працюю, здебільшого така, що я продаю права в межах Великої Британії, а вже далі мій видавець знаходить країни для продажу надалі моїх прав, тож зачасту я не знаю, як відбувається процес, я не певна, що відбувається далі. Однак скажу про приємний досвід із видавництвом Небопукла Паблішинг, які, власне, працювали над книгою «Короля», адже вони зробили неймовірно гарне видання. Це не просто арт-видання, це видання, що дуже чітко, точно інтерпретує мій світ, заховані дрібні детальки в ньому. Ілюстрації, насправді, в цій книзі навіть нагадали мені про історичні романи, які я читав в дитинстві англійською. Незадовго до війни, за 2 дні до неї, якщо точно, видавець надіслав відео та показав свій офіс, свого песика, показав, як все працює, а тоді почалася війна. І Джо дуже хотів би, аби видавництво продовжило і видало 2-ю, 3-ю книгу. На жаль, зараз видається так, що грошей на паперову у них поки не стає, хіба на електронну. І тут уже ремарки від мене, що, любі друзі, якщо ви розумієте, що ваше улюблене видавництво не має змоги отримати певні кошти або надрукувати певні книги, підтримуйте їх гривнею. Так само, як ви підтримуєте наших захисників на фронті, культурний фронт не менш важливий, і підтримуйте їх також. There is actually a very interesting comment here. Greetings from Mariupol. Your books were the last ones that I've read back there, and it helped me to overcome a lot of obstacles on my way to safety. So that is amazing.
And did you know Mariupol now is occupied by Russia?
Yeah. I mean, it's always kind of humbling when people, you know, when your books have had some kind of significant impact on people in any way. You know, sometimes people will email me saying, you know, your book's got me through a hard time or something, which is always kind of shocking in a sense, because I don't know, you find it hard to believe anyone is sort of moved by them. But yeah, it's kind of amazing always to hear that sort of thing.
There is this new comment that your books were the only ones that this woman took from Bucha when the war started. So I guess that there is a lot of people like this with us today.
Wow.
The next question from the audience is about the Red Country. When you were writing previous books, did you know that one of the characters would change the name and continue his story as Lamb?
No, not really. I'd like to say I had a genius master plan for the whole thing. But generally, I kind of write one book at a time, or one series at a time anyway. And I suppose when I start thinking about what a book will be and planning how it will work and who'll be in it, I kind of, you know, I think about who I need, what sort of characters I need, and I think about who's still alive from previous books, and, you know, who might be interesting, who might be useful, what role they could play in a new book, you know, and without wanting to spoil anything, you know, for Red Country, I kind of needed that. It's sort of a Western in a way within that fantasy setting, and so I needed that William Money figure from Unforgiven, that used up man of violence who's kind of retired and now is drawn back for one last job. And so it felt like I had a suitable character on the shelf from previous books. And so for that reason, I used that character because he felt like it fit, you know, but I kind of try not to go back to using the point of view characters I've had in the past. So, you know, when a character's a major point of view within a previous book, I try not to make them a point of view in future books if they turn up again. And I think that gives perhaps a slightly different shading. You know, you've been in that person's head before, but now you see them from the outside, and that's something slightly different, something you can do something different with. So, you know, I try not to go over the same ground if I can avoid it, because I think that's tiring for me and ultimately gets boring for readers in the end. But if there's something new you can do with the same people, the people you've already got, the settings and the ideas you've used before, then it's great to keep, you know, some circularity and to look at how things move on and develop over time.
Хотілося б сказати, що був якийсь геніальний план, щоб відразу так мало трапитись, однак, справді, ні. Я пишу одну книгу за раз, тож коли доходить до наступної книги, доводиться трошки так пригадати собі, хто живий з моїх персонажів, хто взагалі ще щось може зробити потрібне, що який персонаж може для мене привнести далі. І створюючи Red Country, мені, власне, був потрібен персонаж, який вже пішов на пенсію і тут повертається на останнє замовлення. І знайшовся підходящий, власне, персонаж із минулої книги, і це було, власне, насправді гарним поєднанням. Я намагаюся не використовувати ще раз персонажів, які вже були нараторами в моїх минулих книжках. Я намагаюся дозволяти персонажам подати свій голос, дозволяти їм розкриватися з часом. Тож тут насправді було цікавим досвідом подивитися, що час зробив з цим персонажем, яка циклічність життя цього персонажа, який він був в одній книзі, і яким перекочував у наступну.
Can I ask a question? Because I see another question from our fans, from your fans. What specific authors and books, fantasy or beyond, influenced and shaped your writing style the most?
Ooh, it's different. That's really hard because I've kind of used to read. I don't read a lot anymore, weirdly, but I've read a lot when I was younger, and all kinds of things. My mum was an English teacher, and so she kind of got me reading everything imaginable, from kind of classics, all kinds of Eastern books, European books, and a lot of English literature from all kinds of different eras, a lot of non-fiction, and then quite a lot of fantasy of varying kinds. And so, you know, I think every book you read makes some kind of impact on you. Everything that you really like or that you really don't like, you know. And then I think I'm at least as influenced by cinema often, and TV and video games, as I am by books as well. You know, there's a lot of kind of filmic influences in there. I worked as a TV editor for many years, or 10 years before I started writing, and so, you know, that I think is quite a big influence in the way that I write and the way that I kind of tell stories and edit. The way the book's put together is quite influenced by that experience. So there are, you know, dozens, but I mean, some that stand out. Lord of the Rings, obviously. This is going to be really boring because they're all really obvious things, but Lord of the Rings, Wizard of Earthsea, Ursula Le Guin, Michael Moorcock's stuff was quite influential. Le Guin and Moorcock were both doing weird and crazy things when everyone was kind of aping Tolkien, or a lot of people were. So they felt fresh and different in a way that a lot of things didn't. And then, as I say, Game of Thrones, you know, it's kind of obvious to say now, but there was a time when no one had heard of Game of Thrones. I liked it when it wasn't cool, you know, when it first came out. And I'd kind of got out of fantasy. And then I read A Game of Thrones and I saw a lot of what I felt had been missing in terms of the kind of character focus and the grittiness and the shocks and surprises in it. It made it kind of fresh again. But then there's a lot outside of fantasy too. So James Ellroy was a big influence kind of stylistically, because he writes very much in point of view. You know, he writes from the specific points of view, and each one feels very different. They feel like 3 books cut together. You know, when he's writing from one person's point of view, it's full of their voice and the feel of that person. And that was kind of the way that I wanted to write. But then there are dozens of other writers. I mean, I could go on all day. I probably shouldn't.
По правді, зараз я більше не читаю багато. Коли я був юним, читав дуже багато. Адже моя мама була вчителькою англійської мови і відкрила для мене світ абсолютно різних книг. Це були і східні книги, і європейські, і, власне, класична англійська література, та і сама фентезі. Я вважаю, що всі книги, які ми читаємо, впливають на нас, так само, як впливають і не книги. Я багато працював над кіно, я багато граю різних відеоігор, і абсолютно все це вплинуло на те, як я структурую свої книги, як я їх пишу, як я їх редагую. Якщо назвати якісь конкретні приклади книг, що на мене вплинули, то, мабуть, я буду звучати нудним, але це є «Володар перснів», це є «Wither of Earthsea» у студі Легоїн, це є Майкл Муркок, це є «Гра престолів». І тут я буду звучати до біса нудним, але хочеться сказати, що я любив «Гру престолів», коли це ще не було модно. Були також і нефантазійні автори, наприклад, Джеймс Елрой, який неймовірно класно працює із нараторами, який репрезентує їх так, як я хотів би репрезентувати у своїх книгах.
And we have one more question from our colleagues. It's from Natalia Dohopol. It's about how you create your fantasy world, so middle age like. Where is your stop button to end the research and start writing? Because we all know that you read history book and research about these ages.
Yeah, I mean, I think research can be fun, but it can also be quite a distraction. And actually, you don't want to forget that you're writing a story. And for me, the characters and the action and the dialogue are always going to be vastly more important than the setting. You know, it's like in theatre, the set design is kind of important, but you can't have a great play with just good sets. You know, you can have bad sets in a great play, but you can't have bad dialogue and bad characters in a great play. So I guess when I started writing, I felt this need to, you know, have the world somewhat detailed, but quite quickly, as soon as I started experimenting with actually the writing, I just got much more interested in that. You know, I got interested in how you construct a scene, where you use thought, where you use dialogue, how you pace things. I just got fascinated by the nuts and bolts of writing and putting a scene together. And I feel like if you're in the character's head, that is the key thing. It's the voice and the sense of being in the person's head and understanding who the person is. And the setting is very, very secondary for me. I mean, I think fantasy is a genre defined by its fantastical elements, right? And its monsters or whatever it may be. But actually, those aren't that important. It's really the people and the drama between the people and the things fantasy has in common with everything else that are most important. And so these days, I mean, I'm writing something new at the moment, New World, and I'm deliberately not bothering to kind of make the world very rigorous or to make that much sense, because I almost want it to be abstract. I want it to be ignored and for the focus to be on the people and the kind of human drama, because that's far more interesting to me in a sense than in what year, what king won what battle in what mountain pass. You know, I don't care in the end. And I think if I've got 10 hours to spend, I'd rather spend 9.5 of them writing the book that people will read rather than poring over squared paper that no one will ever see. You know, you're writing a book in the end, so let's write a book.
Daria, you're on mute.
I'm sorry For one second, I turned off my mic to not make any sounds, and I forgot. Sorry. Дослідження може бути дуже веселим процесом, а може бути і до біса нудним. Сеттинг важливий, та із хорошим сеттингом не поєднаються поганий сюжет, погані персонажі та криві діалоги. Набагато більше мене цікавить не досліджувати деталі середньовіччя, а як збудувати персонажа, як поєднуються сцени і як збудувати драматичну арку. І я розумію, що фентезі великою мірою про фантастичне припущення, про драконів, про магію, про те, що драйвить цей світ. Але коли ти вчитаєшся в книгу, то ти розумієш, що насправді це про персонажів. І світ складний і повномірний, коли в ньому повномірні персонажі. І ж насправді, якщо мені дадуть 10 годин, то 9,5 із них я обираю писати, а не досліджувати певну історію. Бо так, кому ж насправді цікаво, що в такому-то році такий-то король помер, такий-то був коронований і що ще з ним сталося. Зрештою, коли ти пишеш книгу, основне має бути писати книгу.
Well, we have a huge amount of questions and another one from the audience. How does Joe feel about modern fantasy serial adaptations? House of Dragon, Witcher, Ring of Power. His books are very cinematic, and there are any plans to release some TV series based on his books?
I mean, I would never want the money and glory that would result from such a thing happening, you know? It has come up, I think, ever since Game of Thrones, you know, obviously was such a phenomenon. And really, I think Lord of the Rings in 2001, that happened as The Fellowship of the Ring came out, the film, as I was starting to write. And it was really exciting to see fantasy kind of visualized for the first time in a way that wasn't a bit naff, if that makes sense. It was the first time fantasy had really looked incredible on screen. And then I think A Game of Thrones did something similar in terms of a TV treatment for fantasy, which, you know, for a long time fantasy had been felt it was a bit unfilmable. And Game of Thrones changed that really overnight. And suddenly everyone was looking at fantasy in a new way. And I think anyone who had a reasonably successful series would have got some calls around that time and since. And so I've been involved with some development efforts to bring it to the screen, but I don't know. It's it's a difficult business, and things often go wrong. So it's better not to really say anything until literally the actors are dressed and ready to go on, and then maybe we can talk about it. But until then, it's probably better just to wait and not tempt fate.
I saw your interview with Daniel Green, and he's asked you about Joaquin Phoenix playing Glokta. So I support this motion. I really hope to see Mr. Phoenix one day as Glokta. So really hoping that this will come true.
I'll forward your feelings to him next time we speak.
That's great to hear, both to Mr. Phoenix and to Daniel Green.
Of course, yeah. Regular contact with both, naturally.
Yeah, just coffee chats every single Friday. So like, я би не хотів ні грошей, ні влади, яка приходить із таких гучних екранізацій, як «Володар перснів» чи «Гра престолів». Екранізація «Гри престолів» просто суперова величезна сила. «Братство персня» теж могутня сила. Я пам'ятаю 2001 рік, коли вийшов перший фільм «Братство персня». На той час я тільки починав писати, і я пам'ятаю, наскільки круто було побачити і зрозуміти, що ось знімають фантастику, яка не виглядає так дешево і крінжувато, а яка насправді виглядає захопливо, яка насправді виглядає живою і неймовірною. «Гра престолів» як серіал довело те, що зрозуміти люди, що фентезі може зніматися, що це не є складний до адаптації жанр. І після цього, після успіху цієї адаптації, багато авторів із бодай нормальними текстами отримали дзвінки від кіноіндустрії із проханнями про екранізацію. Так, скажу, що мені теж писали, так, скажу, що є якісь почини в цій справі, однак не можу нічого підтверджувати до моменту, коли актори вже прям одягнуті, вже прям на знімальному майданчику, і це вже не відвернути. І я також нагадую нашим підписникам, що у нас є Patreon. У нас вже тут на стрімі є спонсор. Його питання ми беззаперечно поставили. І ми рекомендуємо підтримати нас не тільки лайком, а й гривнею, бо попереду багато крутого контенту. Ladies, what is the question?
We have another question from our audience. Do you see, Joe, across the books, all the books that you are written, do you have characters that you love to hate or hate to love?
I think I hate all the characters that I'm writing, and I love all the ones I've written. You know, I love the ones in books I've finished, generally, because they're done and they're not going to bother me anymore. You know, it's the books that I'm writing where they're causing trouble. And so sometimes characters just spring onto the page effortlessly, but I find that happens less and less, sadly. They often take quite a lot of effort to get right. I mean, I edit a lot. I'm a kind of writer who works in the edit generally. So I sort of regard the first draft as just splattering the whole thing down as quickly as possible. And then I kind of feel like I'm working once the first draft's there, and I'm kind of going over and revising and editing and developing a sense of what it is I'm actually doing, cutting the things that don't work and, you know, shaping stuff a little bit. So there's certainly characters who work better than others. There are characters who are more natural than others when I write them, and who kind of spring onto the page fully formed. And then there are ones that take more effort and energy. But also, you know, for me, the characters are kind of tools to achieve an effect. They have a purpose within the story in terms of the point of view they offer, the events they cover, the theme, you know, the exploration of the theme they offer. And so, you know, I kind of don't have favorites in the sense that they're all necessary. It's a bit like asking what's the favorite part of the engine. You know, do you prefer the drive belt or the spark plugs? Well, it doesn't work without either. You know, they're both essential. So I tend to, you know, I tend to love all the characters in a way once they're done and out of the way. But for sure, there are ones that work. There's some that work better than others, no doubt.
Ненавиджу всіх тих персонажів, яких пишу зараз, і страшенно люблю всіх тих, яких вже написав. Персонажі бувають різні, бувають ті, які дуже легко знаходять шлях на сторінку, які одразу чіткі, які зрозумілі, є ті, яких доводиться виривати з себе буквально з болем. Часом це складно, і такі персонажі дико бісять. Я багато редагую. Взагалі, я автор, який у першому рукописі накидує структуру оповіді, а уже далі в другій вичитці намагаюся довести це все до пуття. І доволі часто доводиться інтерпретувати, дописувати, розуміти персонажів тоді. Адже, зрештою, виявляється, що ось є персонажі, які дуже тонкі, які виявляються у певних моментах, є такі, які відкривають тему чи конфлікт, а є такі, що дуже складно витягуються назовні, однак необхідні для історії. Зрештою, запитувати, яких персонажів я люблю, а яких ненавиджу, яких, навпаки, ненавиджу любити, це ніби питати, яка частина двигуна улюблена, ключ запалювання чи, власне, внутрішнє згоряння. Без жодного ти не збудуєш історію, без жодного ти не рухатимешся вперед. I see we have some thanks from people. People thank you for the characters, for being here, for visiting Ukrainian audience. So that's great to see. And also the person who asked you that question, Sviatoslav, he is the editor of, I think, one of the last of your Ukrainian translations. So he's the person responsible for rereading everything in Ukrainian, and he is one of the people responsible for bringing your books to the Ukrainian audience. It's really great that those people really came here today and posed their questions.
Absolutely. And thanks to them as well, because, you know, without them, you don't get read. So, you know, they're as important in a way as anyone. You know, I think there's often this attitude that the author's the only important person in the process, you know, and everyone else in publishing is a kind of parasite who doesn't add anything. But everyone is essential in publishing, and it's a team effort always, you know, with editors especially, but also with the kind of production people and the marketing people and the publicity people. It's all essential, and they all, you know, are needed and vital in the process. So, yeah. And, you know, the ones who are working on bringing the books to foreign languages around the world, likewise, same thing. Respect.
Як сказав щойно Джо, то люди вважають, що автори – це є пуп землі у галузі книговидання, однак є безліч тих, без кого це все не вийде. Це є і перекладачі, і редактори, і ілюстратори, і верстальники, і це люди, без яких наша робота була б неможлива, тож дякую їм за це і дякуємо за те, що ви з нами. So I think it was a great discussion. I feel like I've asked a little bit about everything, but the depth of my question has only gotten bigger, and I got only more questions. But I have a very important question to ask Irina. How much money did we gather during this call? I don't hear you.
Sorry. As far as I see, we gathered around 1,000 hryvnias, 10,000. 10,000, yeah. So I don't know how much it is in pounds.
It's a substantial sum in hryvnias. Let me try to tell you in dollars, because that might be a bit easier for us. I don't know the exchange rate for British pound, unfortunately. Just give me a second.
Sure.
So we gathered a bit less than $300, like $250, a bit like $270. Okay. So that is a great number. Ladies, I see another question on the screen. Is this one more? Is this the last one?
No, it's it's a question. Yes, maybe it's last one. Joe, how was it to work with scenario of animated short film?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, so I've known some of the guys behind Love, Death and Robots for a while. Tim Miller, particularly, I know quite well. Who's the kind of one of the central guys behind it, and so for the last series, he asked me if I'd adapt one of them. They're all, I don't know if you know what Love, Death and Robots is. They're kind of short animated films on Netflix, based often on short stories, science fiction, fantasy, horror short stories. And so I adapted one by a writer called Neil Asher about intelligent rats, as you do. And it was great. It was great fun. It was quite quick to do because they're quite short pieces. This one was, I think, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, something like that. And so it was good. It was great fun. I mean, it's amazing to see, you know, to write something and then see it adapted and produced, and to kind of how some things work exactly as you imagined. Some are totally different. Some have been elaborated on, improved and expanded. And yes, it's brilliant to see something actually on screen that you've had that part in. Books is a very kind of private and lonely thing often. You know, you have moments like this, which are great, and you talk to your publisher and your editor at times. And when a book comes out, there's often quite a lot of kind of public and talking to people about your books. But for most of the time, you're sitting there on your own, wrestling with the work. The nice thing about TV and film is that it's a team, you know, and that's a good compliment to books, because it's nice to kind of just be one cog in the machine sometimes and have other people have ideas, you know, that come in. And, you know, it's nice to be able to take in ideas as well as just kind of give them out. So being part of a team is a really nice part about TV and film, I think.
Отже, я знав Тіма Міллера, творця Love, Death and Robots, антології на Netflix доволі давно, і мене доволі давно просили допомогти із адаптацією якогось із оповідань. По правді, недавно стався цілий бум, і ця антологія ілюструвала і адаптовувала твори короткої прози із наукової фантастики, фентезі, горору тощо. І я, власне, адаптовував оповідання Ніла Ашера про розумних щурів. Наскільки я розумію, йдеться про серію із 2-го сезону антології, де є, чи третього сезону, де є оці розумні щури, що схожі на шотландських повстанців, і з ними бореться такий дядечко з допомогою найманих машин. Це доволі короткий мультфільм, це є від 8 до 10 хвилин, наскільки я пам'ятаю, дуже мило. Та й зрештою це був дуже цікавий досвід, адже книги – це дуже самотня робота, дуже закрита в собі. І часом це круто, а часом все, що ти хочеш, це всього лиш бути одним гвинтиком у великій машині творіння, де окрім тебе ще є безліч людей, які талановиті, які подають ідеї і допомагають розвивати певну історію. So with this said, I think it's high time for us to thank you for being with us here today. I really hope this is not the last interview that you have with Ukrainian audience. I do believe that great things are to come, and when the peace comes, maybe there will be something cool, maybe some offline festivals or something. We would be super happy to see you there.
No, it'd be great, and it's been a great interview and very well managed, very effective, very well translated. So no, it'd be great to come out to Ukraine in the fullness of time. I'd love to do that. Yeah. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for great meeting.
Thank you.
Любі друзі, а ми тим часом дякуємо вам за те, що ви були з нами. Нагадуємо, що у нас є Patreon, у нас є можливість бути спонсорованими на Ютубі, у нас є Фейсбук, у нас є Інстаграм, у нас є Твіттер, у нас є, Боже мій, абсолютно все на світі вже є. Ми страшенно раді, що ви з нами, що ви нас дивитеся. Якщо ви ще не підписалися на наш YouTube канал, я закликаю вас дуже сильно зробити це прямо зараз. У нас як мінімум 2 автори будуть на інтерв'ю у вересні, і це не враховуючи контенту, який ми творимо про українську фантастику. Дякуємо за те, що ви з нами. Як сказала Ірина, ми зібрали більше 10 тисяч гривень під час нашого стріму на потреби медичного батальйону госпітальєри. Точнішу суму ми опублікуємо, я думаю, після ефіру, я не помиляюсь. Так, а поза тим, дякую, до нових зустрічей. Thank you, Joe. See ya.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.